and thanks for tuning in today. Oops, that's a little loud. I'm Nicole with Genesis 70s, and today we are here to talk about repotting indoor plants. Now, if you're watching and you're more of an outdoor gardener, or you do indoor and outdoor gardening, a lot of the same kind of concepts of what we're talking about can apply to outdoor repotting as well. So container gardening simply creates for a plant, a defined and confined gardening space within which the roots of the plant have limited access to a finite amount of resources. That's the nutrient level, of course, of the soil, but the soil texture and density can change over time as well. So we can use items like slow release fertilizer, liquid fertilizers, add nutrients back to our plants' soil environments as they deplete them throughout the growing season. But over time, the soil itself compacts, and that's due to, again, kind of active decomposition. That's usually happening as the different components of our soil begin to slowly break down and decompose into more finer particles. Sometimes you'll even see the soil level has sunk, the line has dropped down in your container from where the soil used to be to a lower level, and that's just showing compaction or just that decomposition over time. So refreshing our container soil is one of the primary reasons why we would be repotting a plant, in addition to the obvious signs of growing larger than its current pot and needing to be sized up due to either rapid growth or root volume or those kinds of things. So one of the things that we always like to encourage is that a new plant, when you receive a new plant or purchase a new plant, that you give a new plant about 6 weeks of not repotting it. So it's like a waiting period. So new plants come home to you, and a 6-week waiting period before you repot them is one of the best ways to slowly observe how a new plant adjusts to your home and your growing environment. If you are taking a new plant home, you've created already a difference probably in its light environment or the type of light it receives. Humidity, air humidity, obviously temperature of the room, all of these different factors are going to be different for it. And if you throw an additional factor of change quickly into its whole bag that it's dealing with, that change of soil or addition of a larger pot in volume is just another factor of change that can become difficult to identify if the plant starts to struggle which change factor it's disagreeing to. So whether it's low light or it's the repotting that you did, those kinds of things. So slow adjustments, let your plant get adjusted to your home, 6 weeks, and then go ahead and consider repotting those new plants. It's rare that a brand new, I had to walk around here today at the Bridgeport Village Dennis 70 shop and really kind of stretch the imagination on which plants might need to be repotted. So it's not common that brand new plants need to immediately be repotted. In fact, again, I brought a plant from home that we'll talk about. We're going to learn together whether or not it's ready to be repotted. So not only a waiting period, but the other thing I really like to consider is my plant healthy enough for repotting? And often I actually hear people thinking the opposite. When a plant is struggling, that's often when we decide we're going to repot it. Unfortunately, that is very often kind of the end of, or the beginning of the end for a sick plant, is that repotting, that last kind of attempt to save it. Now, there's nothing wrong with making all attempts to save a plant that may not survive in the first place. But repotting is a procedure. Think of it as kind of like an operation. We would never do surgery, unless it were emergency surgery. We're not going to do surgery on someone who's not at the peak of their health. So ideally getting our houseplants repotted when they are at the peak of their health and just about to begin actively growing during the more growth season for indoor plants, which is really beginning here in March and runs through September. So March through September, they're growing more actively. The sun is higher in the horizon, gives us longer daylight hours. And then from October through February is really most indoor plants kind of time off, where they get watered less, don't need to be repotted. So a lot of us have been waiting for time to now repot our plants. And looking around live plants at home, I see within the last probably 4 to 6 weeks, I've been seeing new growth begin, and quite a bit more now as we get brighter days. We had a great sunshiny day yesterday, and those brighter days and increased duration of light is also signaling the plant it's time to wake up and grow. So lots of new growth is beginning, tiny little baby leaves, which tells us, again, we are right at a great opportunity to repot and consider which plants need to be repotted. So how do you know? Now again, our handout type information is included in the under the title in this video, so you'll have a little bit of information to refer to. But first of all, obvious signs like roots are growing out the bottom of the pot. Well, I do have an example of that here with a lovely ZZ plant. Typically, we know a couple of things about our plants too, which we're always adding into the factors. We know ZZ plants like to go very dry in between watering, and that they're excellent at storing their own water. So in most cases, that means that a ZZ plant would prefer to have a pretty small container relative to the plant size. So proportionately, it still looks pretty good. A good sized plant in a 6-inch diameter nursery pot, not bad for apportionment. But we do see a giant root. Looks like a rat's tail coming out the bottom of this pot. So it's several more actually roots you can see coming through the bottom of the holes. And so this is obvious that the container could be upsized. Now we would take a 6-inch and size it up into an 8-inch, which is really no more than a 2-inch difference. Now that's still a significant jump. We get a little bit deeper and a little bit wider in diameter. And proportionally, we still have a plant that doesn't look lost in its container. We would not take something like this, easy, and jump it directly into a large container like this 12-inch, 14-inch, 12-inch. So we wouldn't go from a 6-inch straight to a 12-inch. Too big of a jump, especially for a slow-growing plant that prefers to be on the dry side and have a small container. So doing a little bit of that kind of research ahead and knowing what your plant likes is also very helpful. So roots coming out the bottom of the drainage holes, or sometimes roots will even push the plant up and out of the pot itself. So whether if they don't come out the holes, they can heave up out of the container themselves. Now we also can see occasionally a plant that is top heavy, and that is where my Cactus aglaonema that I brought from home, clearly a 4-inch pot that has served it well, but it's potentially growing out of scale. Now this would be a lovely 6-inch, would make a very nice 6-inch plant. Still looks very appropriate in size and scale to the plant size. And we're only, again, increasing about an inch maybe in the bottom and 2 inches around the edges. So we'll talk about and look further into detail on whether or not this Chinese evergreen or aglaonema should be repotted. We see that the proportion is off, but we need to check a few other factors, and we'll get into that as well. Now, another factor may be that the soil dries out excessively or quickly or pulls away from the edges. It's another good indication that the soil just has lost its ability to really flex and expand and contract with moisture. The plant itself grows more slowly is another indication that it may be a good idea to repot. And then signs of salt buildup or mineral buildup or kind of a white crusty material that shows either on the top layer of the soil or around the edges of the pot. That may just be something that we should do a soil exchange and refresh the soil, but not necessarily repot the plant. So again, we can kind of go into assessing whether we go up in size or just exchange old soil for new soil, or even perhaps, just decide that we could give it a better growing environment by mixing some of our own soil blends ourselves. So best time to repot, again, we're right there. Ideally, the plan to repot is not just one of those things that you just, you know what, I'm gonna repot my plants right now. I mean, you're gonna think about it, gather materials, and about 2 days before, at least 2 days before you're gonna repot your plants, they should get a nice watering. So I did kind of break that rule, and I watered Cactus last night. So we may be a little bit on the wet side, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So water 2 days before, that way it's well hydrated, but not soaking wet when you get it ready to be repotted. How often do you have to do this? It depends on the type of plant, the age of the plant, and somewhat your growing environment. But so what I mean by the age of the plant is, think about kids, or when you were a kid, kids grow out of their clothes, like yesterday, or as soon as you get them, they're almost already out of their clothes. So the younger plants are, the faster they are growing, which means that immature plants or younger plants need to be repotted more frequently. So we'll be looking at every year to 18 months to repot young plants or faster growing plants. A Monstera is a perfect example of when you've got a small Monstera and it's rapidly growing, repotting that once a year is a perfect thing to do. But eventually, 10 years down the line, your 10-year-old Monstera or more mature Monstera does not need to be repotted every year and could easily go to a 2 to 3 year repotting interval or frequency instead, due to slower growth and the fact also that it may have hit the point where you are not encouraging it to do a lot more rapid growth, unless you're going to, rent out a little cabin on the property for it, because it'll be so large it needs its own room. So younger plants, repot more frequently. More mature plants, every 2 to 3 years is fine, or as needed. And again, often as those plants mature, rather than increasing in container size, we will simply be repotting to refresh the tired soil that's in the container, do possibly a little bit of root pruning or cleanup, and then repot with anywhere from a half to third new soil into the same size container, and that's perfectly fine as well. So again, how big should that container be? Well, we suggest going up in increments 2 to 3 inches in diameter, larger than the container that you're starting with. So in most cases, again, like nursery grow pots, start at 2 inches and go 2 inches, 4 inch, 6 inch, 8 inch, 10 inch, 12 inch, 14, etc. Now, excuse me, often, these days especially, the choice in containers and vessels that you can use to display your houseplants range from macrame to hand-woven baskets to locally made pottery to, in all of the types of different containers. But one of the more common trends of new pots and new indoor containers is that they do not have drain holes in them. So those of us that really water and you know, have a wide range of plants, some that need more water, some that need less water, no drain hole means I am not going to plant directly into this container. So we don't suggest putting dirt straight into a pot with no drain hole and trying to make a plant grow in there. It is going to be a struggle, a long-term struggle for you. What we do recommend is that these holeless planters be used as a cache pot, or what we would just simply refer to as a drop-in style container. And that means, here, we'll have to struggle. So that means we would take a 6-inch plant like our ZZ here, and we would drop it down into, now this is, the plant itself has kind of morphed to this pot so it doesn't fit quite as well, but letting that sit in and then being able to remove it for watering, and even taking something like my cutlass, which we're possibly going to size up into a 6-inch, we wanted to display that by sitting it in this lovely larger container. If it's not ready to be repotted and would prefer to be in this tight pot already, but aesthetically, I want it to have a larger base, well, I've already just solved that problem without actually risking potentially the plant's health by giving it a larger container that it needs simply to be repotting for looks and not for health issues. So now, as you can see, this little 4-inch pot sits a little low down in this. So preferably, I would have it a little closer to the surface, to the top of the pot, and you could lift it up on the bottom with either packing peanuts like styrofoam. Honestly, I tend to have a nice supply of wine corks at home. I don't know where they come from, but they make great bottom supports, just one nice little layer down there. So again, occasionally we can solve a problem without adding more problems down the line for watering issues. So container size and drop-in containers and how we pot and grow things, we love to use the plastic containers not only for this drop-in situation, but honestly, one of the biggest struggles people have with growing indoor plants is watering, and how frequently to water, how much to water, and it's really kind of all we've got. So all we've got to offer the plants is water. We want to just engage with them. It seems like we will water. Now, overwatering is the most common cause of plant distress, to put it lightly, and most gardeners that lose plants lose them due to a root rot or an overwatering scenario. To talk about watering fairly is, so many different factors affect watering. Not only, as I mentioned, we water less in the winter, what type of plant you're watering, how much water it wants. A peace lily wants 2 to 3 times the moisture level of a ZZ plant. I mean, I'm just kind of making that up, but I think that that's a pretty accurate statement. More, at least. Peace lily wants more moisture in a more constantly moist soil, and a ZZ wants to stay dry. Now, the Chinese evergreen, Aglaonema, is somewhere in between. Now, what I love to do with the plastic containers is use the weight of the container to tell me how much water is in the soil. A bright light, or a plant that's growing in a bright light environment will also make it use more water than the exact same plant growing in lower light. So at home, I've just recently added some high lumen grow lights. As if you watched our class last week, that I talked about some of those. The addition of grow lights in my house is making my watering pattern change to water slightly more frequently as the plants are responding to that grow light and growing a little bit faster too. So changes in the environment, changes in your lighting will also affect plants' water needs and water usage. So how big my container needs to be, and when you repot, and all about soil and specifics on the plants themselves, I hope that kind of explains some of the uniqueness of making the assessment of whether or not to repot. You ask yourself a lot of questions. Now, before we get into like soil blends, soil ingredients, is really an important thing to talk about, because before we can blend the soil ingredients, we really kind of need to understand what some of these different ingredients are. And honestly, I'm not saying that you need to blend your ingredients at all. We carry a range of potting soils that are appropriate for different plant growth specifications. Cactus, citrus, and succulents do well in a soil that is a little bit sandier with sharper drainage. And then we have a G&B all-purpose potting soil here. There's, again, at our garden centers, bonsai soil. There's different soils for different plants, and ways that you can also, combine them together. Not to mention Malibu, Baby Blue's compost-based potting soil, which we carry at our garden centers. Now I want to read the ingredients. This is an organic indoor-outdoor potting soil, G&B. You can see again for indoor and outdoor potting. Potting soil is, potting soil should have an ingredients list on the label, and potting soil varies wildly in quality. And so one of the things is the inputs, the various ingredients that are used, and the quality of the ingredients. I mean, it's just like food, right? The quality of the ingredients that goes into the food makes a better product in the end. Not only better tasting, but more healthy and just better. So we want to look at the ingredients, and if you're buying, I mean, not to knock like the corner store or whatever, but if you're, buying potting soil at 7-Eleven or something, it's probably not going to be high quality potting soil. So really checking the ingredients and going a little bit for a higher end potting soil is going to make a big difference. I mean, it's kind of like, that's the house that your plant lives in. So if you really love your plants, then again, really love your potting soil as well, and realize the impact that makes. So ingredients here: recycled forest products. Now that's a wood or wood-based type material. So I here have some bark fines that we'll talk a little bit more about, but these are typically pine or pine bark. So wood is a bulk and a little bit of an aeration material usually. And here in ingredients, just like food, it's listed in volume. So first off is that recycled forest products. Next, in this soil, we have a composted chicken manure. That's a nutrient package. So composted chicken manure is pretty water soluble. That means the plant's going to get a little pick-me-up of fresh nutrient right away. It does not make this smell because it's well composted, so you don't have to worry about that. Then we have bark fines. Again, back to a smaller wood product that is going to slowly break down over time to become soil, but bark tends to break down slower than wood does. So the bark is going to last longer as spacers and provide that aeration as well. And all of the different surface, kind of microscopic surfaces on bark also are kind of pocked and irregular, and that creates a nice home for beneficial fungal bodies and bacteria to live in the soil. So bark fines. Then we have, again, a little bit more nutrients. So feather meal, dehydrated chicken manure, rice hulls. Now this is a soil that's made in California. They have a lot of rice in their agriculture industry. So rice hulls, which are typically the inedible part of harvesting rice. Rice hulls are a natural recyclable ingredient that would also be a waste product if they didn't have places to use it. So rice hulls are used again as a bulk and aerating material that takes a longer time to decompose. Then back to one for nutrition. Perlite, we're going to look at this perlite as well in more detail, but perlite has aeration. It's pretty chemically neutral. It's pH neutral. It's a puffed up volcanic rock or mined mineral that is just creating space in the soil. Now, perlite sometimes floats to the top and people don't like that so much, so you could use pumice instead. But perlite, then peat moss, alfalfa meal, oyster shell, and dolomite lime. The limes are pH adjusters to kind of address that. Peat moss is a little bit acidic. And then worm castings and kelp meal. So again, a little bit more of that nutrient package again. There's a ton of stuff, I mean, ton of ingredients, high quality organic ingredients in this potting soil that make it really great all-purpose. It is not, sometimes you will see peat-based. It is not a peat-based potting soil. It's the recycled forest products is the base of this soil. So although it does have peat moss in it, peat moss is much lower down in the ingredients list, so lower content of peat moss by far. Now the succulent and cactus mix has fewer ingredients, but still quite a few. Starts with the forest products, then pumice, sand, bark fines, chicken manure, both composted and dehydrated chicken manure, feather meal, worm castings, kelp meal, bat guano, oyster shell, and dolomite lime as the pH adjusters. Now this is a much heavier soil just by the sand volume. It is not only great for sharp drainage, so water goes through it pretty quickly. Did it have peat moss in it? Did I say peat moss? No peat moss. So just the recycled forest products. So it doesn't have the water holding capacity that a soil that has more of the peat in it does. So that gives it that sharp drainage. And the heaviness can sometimes be necessary to weight the base of something like a heavier cactus or heavy succulent. Now, I have, of course, always love to show dirt on camera, but here is an example of the cactus mix or succulent mix. And you can see all of the different particles as I kind of toss it around. We see some of the wood fines that are floating onto the top. We also see a little bit of the kind of whitish or tan colored pieces. That's the pumice. But really, in general, it's not one single ingredient. It looks like a lot of different ingredients mixed together, a little bit chunky, but that is just what the plant's like. So, and a nice dark color. These little wood shavings are in kind of a format that helps, again, to create lots of air and wedges into the soil to hold it as a fluffier or looser nature, which is great for the plant roots to get through, but then that heaviness is excellent for kind of giving a pretty, sometimes a heavy cactus or succulent, something to hold, anchor its roots so it doesn't, fall out of the pot. Now, the other ingredients I have here, let's look closer at. And on your handout, we break down a little bit in more detail some of these materials, but a close-up look at peat moss shows not only how fluffy, very light and airy and fluffy it is, but we see a lot of kind of stringy, they're very fine, but very stringy particles or stringy materials in the peat moss. That's, of course, because this is a very ancient resource that is, peat is somewhat controversial in that it is a non-renewable resource. So we are depleting peat bogs and not able to, of course, have them recover as we deplete them. And peat moss generally comes from eastern Canada, meaning that there's a high carbon footprint as it gets trucked across the country or world. So thinking about all of these things, because of course we garden and grow plants, to beautify our own lives, but also in many cases to, be a better person or a better citizen of the world, or that kind of thing. So these things are important to take into consideration. Now, in most cases, the alternative to peat moss, though, is a coconut coir, C-O-I-R, and coconut coir also has long, stringy fibers because it is I just borrowed some from Zizi. Coconut core is basically the shredded outer hull of the coconut. You know, the brown stringy stuff on a coconut? So it is, again, we see these long fibers. It is fluffy and loose. Now, obviously, coconuts don't grow nearby either here in Portland, Oregon, so this isn't exactly a local resource itself. The carbon footprint, coconuts are quite sustainable. There's lots of coconut palms in the world, and coconuts grow every year. You don't have to kill the coconut palm to, of course, harvest a coconut, so they can sustain themselves, but they're coming a long ways away. So shipment or shipping on coconut core can also be have its own environmental footprint. There's hydrated and dehydrated cocoa core. So dehydrated, obviously, smaller footprint, smaller packaging, less packaging, lighter weight, so less shipping. So all of those things, you know, are good to take into consideration when you're weighing your environmental footprint, when you're concerned about that. And so coconut core or peat can kind of be used either one or the other, or you can make a combination of those. Just remember again, peat moss has a little bit of acidity. If you're using a lot of it blended in, you can add some lime or the dolomite shells to balance the pH. Now, the bark fines, as I was talking about, I do love this shredded orchid bark. It sometimes is referred to as seedling orchid bark, so we use it quite a bit in orchids themselves, but usually, as I mentioned, there's wood, and then there's bark. So not to be used interchangeably. Obviously, wood is the inner, softer fibers usually of a tree, and bark is the outer material that has some natural resistance to decay and rot. So the addition of bark and bark fines is different than adding wood and wood fibers. Now, I don't have any straight up compost, but you will see again using just straight compost in your potting blends can be great to do, and whether it's manure-based compost, like we see the composted chicken manure in our potting soil, or whether it's vegetable scraps in your own homemade compost is great to add. Sand is another one, as I mentioned, is in usually the cactus mixes and succulent mixes to create anchoring weight in the soil, as well as that really sharp drainage. Perlite, I did mention, is that puffed volcanic mineral or rock, very lightweight. It's light and airy, and again mixes into the soil to create air holes and pores where the soil can't compact. And that way, again, air and moisture can move through the soil. Unfortunately, perlite can also move through the soil because it's less dense and lighter weight than most of these other soil particles. Perlite can float to the surface over time, not only creating kind of a unsightly white polka dot look on the top of the soil, but when it's moving out of the root zone of the soil, it's also lessening its actual impact in there in the first place. So a mixture of perlite and pumice is a good way to kind of compensate for that, or even pumice itself, which tends to kind of stay where it's at. Pumice, again, heavier than perlite, also a volcanic rock. Pumice and perlite both, again, have those really angular, kind of gritty pores, which also are great places for mycorrhizae and probiotics, bacteria that's beneficial to the plant roots, to kind of have a little home or a place to anchor. So again, all of these different surfaces, even though we don't think about them in the whole on potting soil, they all play these really cool different roles within, not only as like kitchen cabinets, so a place to store a plant's nutrients, so that later when it's hungry, it has access to stored nutrients within the soil not always waiting for us, for example, you know, to come by with our little watering can full of fertilizer. So storing nutrients in the soil is a great way for plants to, you know, not depend too much on us. Now lime, I mentioned lime as a pH adjuster. A couple of other items that you'll see as nutrient packages. So all the manures, kelp meal, which is fabulous as just kind of a sturdy, kelp meal is great for cell structure, stem strength, and also just to keep your plants kind of even keeled. It's, you know, with kelp meal, plants are able to handle stress a little bit more easily. It's a form of seaweed. It's again all organic. Kelp meal can be applied liquid or as a granular, and you can always mix it in with your potting soil at the time of repotting, just as a little boost. The same goes for back guano, alfalfa meal. All of these things are going to add little bits of nutrient or boost to your plants based off of whether or not you want to see them really put on some rapid growth, or if maybe they need a little just that cell strengthening or stem strengthening if they're kind of floppy. And one that I love to use, whether it's as a top dressing, even if I'm not exchanging soil, I'm going to put a little on top, or to blend into my custom soil mixes. I do love to use always like a handful of worm castings. Worm castings, that's earthworm poop for the lay person. The fabulous thing about worm castings, not only again are they a mineral-rich, trace minerals particularly, so not the primaries, but the secondary and trace minerals for plants. They are also adding soil kind of structure, and they have beneficial, it's like enzymes, basically, as you know, as the soil passes through the inside of the worm, the poop that comes out the other side has special enzymes that are beneficial to plant health. So it's not just soil, it's like miracle soil. Worm poop is awesome. I don't have any worm poop on me today. I was able to find some peat moss in my car. I'm sorry I couldn't find worm poop in my car, but I know it's in my potting shed at home. And it's one of those things that I just use indoors or outdoors pretty religiously. Now, we gave you some kind of step-by-steps on repotting, materials to gather before repotting, and step-by-step instructions on potting in general. But I'm going to clear my table here just for a little soil blending. Now that we've talked about this guy, and I'll show you kind of what I've got going here for materials. I'm going to take away my cactus mix. Ooh, I have this. Okay, here's my materials. Getting ahead of myself. Now, there's a lot of, you can have all kinds of fancy, you know, fancy tools. Fancy tools are great. Just a nice big spoon, helpful. I've got my super duper prune anything shears that I can't really go outside and get dressed without having on me, and that's just Felco's. But a houseplant pair of snips is also really handy. This is a smaller, finer blade, easier to just get in and do little tiny cleanups. And of course that's always something that we may be doing as we're repotting. So I have my snips nearby, I have a spoon, I have a couple of paint brushes. The paint brushes are useful, especially when you're repotting things and you get a lot of dirt on the top or on the leaves or whatever. When you're all done, you can definitely, you know, clean up the whole situation, get the dirt out from amongst the cactus spines with just good old paint brushes or makeup brushes. I suppose makeup brushes work. And like a chopstick, a bamboo skewer, something, even at just a number 2 pencil, unsharpened ideally, but it doesn't matter if it's sharpened. A pencil, and then this is my patented, soon to be patented, homemade cork wand. And this is great again, especially for succulents, where you don't necessarily want to get your fingers real close to the plant to pack in the soil. You can use this fabulous tool to help kind of settle the soil. On the other side, a nice little bamboo skewer we can use to kind of tease apart roots as well. So all very helpful, but probably items that you can either find at home or quickly make from materials that you already have at home. Now before I get into blends, I also want to show another secret pro tip, and that is how the heck do you touch, handle, and repot a spiny cactus? Now, we have shown this before in some of our classes that deal more directly with growing cactus and succulents, but I still thought it was important to address in case some of you out there are looking at something very pokey that also is showing signs of needing to be repotted. Now, I simply use a couple layers of paper towel, so a couple layers of paper towel that have just been folded multiple times to make a thick band that is long enough basically to wrap around the cactus. So you may have to kind of make extensions on this if you've got a great big cactus. If it's like a barrel cactus and it's large, sacrifice an old pair of jeans or something that you can do this very similar concept with. Canvas, burlap works. But what you're going to do with that nice big thick piece of paper towel is you're going to wrap it around your spiny cactus. Watch about the neighbor's spiny cactus, that's going to get you. And once we have that wrapped all the way around the cactus, we can give it a twist. And again, now it can come out, be checked, be repotted, be placed into a new home or a new container. Don't reuse this paper towel even though it looks pretty clean. Don't wipe your forehead, sweat that you were so worried about. Don't do that, just throw it out. But same can be done with an incredibly spiny little guy like this. Same idea. Wrap the band around. You could give it a little twist so it's nice and tight. It gives me something to hold. A squeeze or two of the pot, and out it comes. Look, it barely has any roots, so we wouldn't have much else to hold on to otherwise. Now we can move it, repot it, keep ourselves protected and safe, and then resituate it in its new home. Now again, that's where that little cork wand comes into play, so that you don't actually have to touch it quite as much. Go over here, grab my cactus mix. Since I pulled this guy out, we need to give him another little home. Now, for later. Now, here I have some potential plants for repotting. And this is where this guy doesn't need it. We've already figured that out. It's just there for show. Now, to really assess whether it's time to repot or not, we want to check out the roots. And I know that seems really basic, but I'm always surprised at how often I ask, well, have you taken it out of its pot to look at the roots? Someone, it looks like, no. I don't exactly pop the hood and check my engine, even if my car isn't running, because I guess I wouldn't know what I was looking at. So that is kind of the equivalent, but we should start to understand the basic mechanics of our houseplants, and we should start understanding what the roots look like, or should look like, or should not look like. And all of those things, I think, are important in learning how to care for a plant. So back to my cutlass aglaonema here, Chinese evergreen, getting it out of its pot because it's a little bit root bound. I'm going to give it a couple of squeezes around just to loosen the soil. I don't see roots coming out the bottom like we saw on the ZZ, but it's just proportionally kind of, out of whack. And here we see not too bad. There's not circling roots or It's not a giant mass of roots at the bottom. Honestly, I see a pretty healthy root system. What's a healthy root system? Well, in most cases, healthy roots are light or bright in color, so we can see a direct contrast of bright roots versus the dark soil. Now, occasionally an older plant's going to have a combination of old gray dead roots, maybe higher up or towards the bottom of the plant, and then a good portion of bright white or light colored roots as well. So roots don't last forever either. We'll have old roots and new roots. But we want to make sure that there's plenty of new roots. We see a couple of them are starting to maybe get up closer to the surface or circling in a weird direction. But honestly, oh, and we do see a little bit of a crusting. See if I can you see that on camera? So a little bit of a white buildup on the soil surface on this Aglaonema. But honestly, I'll admit, I have a little hand lens, a little magnifying glass that I carry around in my pocket. And I looked at this little white crust, and it's like a mycelial strand. So it's a fungus strand that is beneficial in the soil. It's not an angular crust, which would like a salt crystal would look like in a little magnifying lens, would be a little angular crustiness. So if it were salt, I would try to get it off, or a mineral, I would try to get rid of it, but because it's a mycorrhizae or a beneficial fungus, I'm not super concerned about it. Now, that means again, that I'm not going to repot Mr. Cutlass here. It's going to go back in to this container. If I wanted to, I could take a little bit of this topsoil off. That's where I love to use my little bamboo skewer. We just scratch up this top surface, and you can get quite a bit of that off without even yet seeing roots or damaging roots. And now that we've kind of taken some, just if you didn't like the look of the white crust or didn't know if it was good or bad, you don't look at it with a magnifying lens, that's perfectly fine there. Now I could give it, and what I will do at home, because now I've decided he's not going to be repotted, now because I've removed some of that top layer of soil, I can give it a top dressing of, I will do worm castings. So a tiny layer of worm castings, very light dusting of worm castings, and then worm castings are actually hydrophobic. So they stop water from penetrating the soil, which means that we want to put a light layer of potting soil on top of the worm castings, which as we water them will help the water kind of push through to the whole root system. Now, I do want to address bottom watering as well as we get into the blends. Putting a plant in a saucer or dish of water and letting it absorb through the holes in the bottom of the container is, for many plants, actually their preferred method of watering. So string of pearls is an ideal plant that's bottom watered, doesn't like to have the upper parts of the plant wetted. Bird's nest fern doesn't like to have the leaves wetted on top, so bottom watering is great for them. African violets, a classic that doesn't like to have its leaves wetted, so we water it in a saucer or in the sink or whatever. In addition to just not wetting the leaves, bottom watering can help reduce soil compaction. So when we water over the top all the time, even though we don't think of it, water's heavy. I mean, just feel the weight of your watering can. Water's heavy. So over time, water passing through the soil is helping to compact the soil around your root system. So bottom watering can reduce the instance of compaction through that pouring water over the top. So Cutlass, you're not going to get it today. However, our ZZ, we're clearly in need of repotting the ZZ plant because of these big roots that are coming out the bottom of the drain holes. Now, if this is also your plant, first of all, the The obvious thing that you're going to be struggling with is, how do I do with these roots? Do I like cut the pot away from the roots? These roots are, although they are at the moment brightly colored, they are sort of crusty, they are hard, and they are dried. And the odds of them actually being viable roots are 50-50. Plant's been sitting on it, gets picked up a lot here in the showroom, so those roots we don't need to really focus on saving, but we also don't just automatically snip them up. So we're just gonna take the plant out of its container, and what roots come with us is great, and what roots don't is part of the deal. So now, Chinese evergreen, Aglaonema, ZZ, Zamioculus, and believe it or not, peace lily over here, Spathiphyllum. All three of these plants happen to be members of the aroid family. Now we may know more common members of the aroid family, which would be our philodendrons and our monsteras. But it is this flower form that is your traditional flower form of an aroid. So we have what's called a spathe, which is kind of this traditional backing with a center pokey uppy part. Something like this, very traditional aroid flower form. Aroids do prefer loose soil, so soil that's not really dense, certainly not something like a succulent and cactus mix has that weight and that anchorage that a cactus likes or a succulent likes, but although it's sharp draining, and we know that aroids want well draining soil, it's too dense and it's too heavy for our aroids. So ideally using a standard potting soil for aroids and possibly blending in some additional amendments that will increase aeration and kind of just general fluffiness, for lack of better terminology, is going to make your aroids much happier. And that's going to reduce the odds of you potentially overwatering or the root rot scenario as you go. So you will see again on the handout, I give you a custom soil mix for cacti, kind of blends, just part, one part this, one part that. But then a custom soil mix for aroids, and that is equal parts a cocoa, like the coconut coir, or peat-based potting soil, or cocoa-based potting soil. We like baby booze. Today I've got the G&B, which we know is not as peat-based, so I'm going to add peat to it. And then we want equal parts to that perlite, or you could do pumice, or a combo, perlite and pumice. And then the shredded bark fines or seedling orchid bark. Now again, because I can't help it, I'm going to throw in a handful of worm castings. You could also add any of those other nutrients that we talked about, kelp meal, charcoal to help just kind of, with odor in case you're extremely odor sensitive, those kinds of things. So all of those additional amendments would be done in smaller volume than our kind of primary components. So here, just to give you an idea, very simple. A lot of us would already have maybe, like a large drainage container. You can borrow it from one of your plants. And then we're gonna do one part of the GMB potting soil, and then I'm gonna just add to it a handful of peat moss because I want that a little bit extra water holding. And then, whatever part you want, right? So I'm just using a scoop that works for me. So 1 part soil, 1 part seedling bark, and then 1 part perlite or pumice. Now perlite's really dusty, and so you always want to wear a mask. Look, I'm wearing a mask. You always want to wear a mask when you're working with perlite just to avoid breathing in all the dust. So, haha. And now we're going to just mix it up. Another pro tip that I find is kind of a game changer, and we could also have this kind of funky cork bark. Add a few, I like chunky soil. So add all of this together, and then the pro tip is, when we're repotting, we need to have our soil pre-moistened. So I'm going to pre-moisten this mix. Not only does that cut down on dust and mess, let's see if that's enough, but it's, you know, we watered our plant 2 days ago that was going to be repotted, right? So that we were supposed to water it 2 days ago so that it's nice and hydrated. That means it doesn't really need a drink when we finish. So when we finish repotting, we're going to water to settle the soil and kind of blend it together, but we're not really watering to hydrate. So we want this soil already to be hydrated enough to do its job. So, Mr. ZZ, 6-inch is going to go into an 8-inch. And that's not an incredible size jump. So it's still going to look great in there. It's going to give it a little bit more room. We are going to be more cautious when watering Mr. ZZ in a larger container until it kind of roots in and gets itself adjusted. So, set this down. We put, because we have a shorter container, this is a deeper container, I'm going to put a little bit of soil in the bottom. Did I make enough? Maybe I didn't make enough soil. Put a little bit of soil in the bottom there. Now we're going to take him out of the pot, and not only has he got roots coming out of the pot, but this ZZ is starting to change the shape of the container. So I don't know if you can actually see that, but it's not round any longer, it's oval, because inside ZZ plants have this like, almost like a potato down in the soil. We're going to see it if you haven't seen it before. And the potato is like muscling out the edges of the pot. It's not a potato. Don't eat it. So, here we go. We got to squeeze it, loosen it. It's okay if a little bit of cocoa comes out into my bowl, so I'm all right with that. Whoa. Now, that root came right back out through the hole, so we didn't have to worry about cutting it or doing any special extraction. Here is a good look at what I'm calling the potato, but it's really just like a tuber, a water storing tuber that is usually down underneath the soil. Here's another down here. So not only do ZZs have this big, like thick, fleshy stem and a shiny, waxy leaf, but also this odd tuber-style water-holding root system that makes it extremely efficient with the moisture that it has. We see some lovely new growth as well on this guy, and a lot of extra soil up top. And what I'm actually going to do, now that we have taken a look under the hood, we see a nice healthy root system here. We want to put it into this 8-inch, some of this old soil. It's crumbling away, and that's fine. If it were older, I would even try harder to actually get some of that old soil off, because we want to just get rid of it. You can put old soil in your compost. You could put old soil, old potting soil, like at the bottom of some of your outdoor, like larger containers, as well as a great place to use old soil. When it's tired, it's just kind of lost its ability to hold and release water. So it's like a rubber band that can't snap open and closed anymore. So here again, my little of that soil down into the kind of spaces in the roots. Just moving it around, giving it a little shake down to the last of my soil blend. And I want to make sure that I've covered back up that little bit of soil that I uncovered in the beginning. And then tucking, now I need to make more soil, but this is a wonderful loose mix. I'm going to use my fingers to now just kind of tuck it a little further in to make it nice and secure. Add to blend more soil after class and add one final layer on top. But as you see here, I'm not to the very top of the container. What I'd like to do is stop right at the ridge that is sort of maybe about 3/4 of an inch above the top. There's a ridge or a lip inside the container. That's why when I stop with my potting soil, that allows me to have kind of space to water or add water and then let that water sink down into the soil. So that gives it kind of a water reservoir, they call it. Now again, now that we've repotted, I know that this plant has more soil volume than it used to, but it's also got a different soil blend. So it's getting used to a larger pot and a different environment. So monitoring its water is easiest done by using, again, that weight of the container. I know that this is moist soil, a plant that's been recently watered, so I'm going to gauge this as sort of its base watered weight. Once it has lost at least half the weight that it is now, I will water it again. And on something like a ZZ or a snake plant, it could go even beyond that loss of half its weight before watering it again. So especially in the repotted, we want to just be as cautious as possible in the potential to overwater the plants. Now, we could also, as we're repotting, kind of the final act, we could add a organic fertilizer. It's finally getting to be, again, active growing period where we can feed our plants. Joyful dirt makes a great houseplant fertilizer or a succulent fertilizer that can be either kind of directly applied to the soil or added to your watering can to the water and then watered in. There are a lot of other, again, liquid fertilizers out there and available. Use and choose, you know, which one is that works best for you or that your plants respond to. Baby Boo or Malibu's Compost also makes a compost tea for house plants, which is really just a great watering in or transplant type solution. So you would put a tea bag into your watering can and let that tea kind of steep about 8 hours or overnight, and then water your plants, especially the newly transplanted plants, to settle them in with the compost tea is going to, again, give them a little bit more of the microbial boost that will help them settle in their new home, so to speak. And then finally, fungus gnats. So should you, especially when you repot, you've added soil and soil volume, but the plant hasn't moved into that soil yet with roots. So water sits in that vacant soil and just sits there until it evaporates naturally, by itself. That potentially sets up a situation where the soil stays too wet, a fungus begins to grow in the soil, and what we often see come after that is a little fruit fly-sized black gnat that flies around in our house. This is a fungus gnat. The fungus gnat is a secondary symptom of the primary problem, which is overwatering, now leading to a root rot, which is caused by a fungus that is building up in the soil. Fungus gnats can be discouraged by backing off on watering and letting your plant dry out. However, there are larvae of the fungus gnat that are potentially living in the soil, and they're feeding on the roots themselves of the plant, kind of weakening the plant itself in the root system. And what we notice is the adult nut that's in our wine and in our coffee. This product here is a way to help you address a major fungus gnat infestation, especially if it's come after repotting. This is a bacillus bacteria, so it's traditionally used to treat mosquito and mosquito larvae in bird baths and that kind of thing. But Bacillus thuringiensis substrain israeliensis is a non-toxic to fish and wildlife and plants, but toxic to fungus gnats and mosquitoes. Product that you would basically apply, shake onto the top surface of a plant's pot that has fungus gnats in it, and then when you water through the material, the bacteria is released out into the soil, and that is what kills the fungus gnat larvae in the soil. So I have seen on my Facebook feed, because I look at a ton of plant things, I know, right? So on my Facebook feed, I've been getting this ad for, I'm not going to call it by name, but it is an apparatus that seems to be some sort of suckable fan type machine that sucks air in and catches bugs, and their whole sales pitch is that houseplants cause bugs in your house. That's not right. Houseplants do not cause insects or bugs in your house. Overwatering and improper houseplant care and culture causes not only plant demise and death, but can also, early on, be seen to bring more pests and bugs into your house. So don't be fooled. Change your practices, up your game, improve your soil blends, learn how to water and check for water only when plants are needing it, and you shouldn't have those bug issues in the first place. So lots to cover on something so basic, but I really wanted to be as thorough as possible. I hope you learned something today. I would love to hear about your houseplant repotting success or failures and questions if ever. We are here for you. I offer a virtual houseplant consultation program through Dennis's 70s, so check our website if you're interested in hooking up for having me FaceTime with you or Zoom in your living room and take a look at your plants. We could repot together on a Zoom party. Other than that, comments will be answered if you haven't already answered those questions directly after the video. As always, thanks for watching. Happy gardening.